Welcome to this Understanding Defense video. This video is being done in preparation for promulgation of the RPRC standard. In this video, what we'll be discussing is what is an RPRC, which is a real property replacement cost. We'll go over how you can calculate an RPRC, and we'll also examine how D&D actually computes its RPRC right now. A real property replacement cost is an estimate of what it would take to build an asset of the same size and function as an existing asset. The RPRC is a key asset management metric. We use it to help us describe the size of the portfolio, whether we are looking at comparing it to other government departments or to compare L1s within D&D. We use it to help establish M&R allocations. The RPRC is critical to how we compute condition scores for our asset and for the portfolio as a whole. And lastly, we have M&R spending targets that are associated to our RPRC value. The RPRC is reported in the Departmental Results Framework, the Management Accountability Framework, and to Treasury Board through the DFRP. Now, there are several ways that you can calculate a replacement cost. These include a building component analysis, a cost factors analysis, and by looking at actual construction project costs. We'll now look into each one of these in more detail. For a building component analysis, this is one of the most detailed ways of examining or creating an RPRC estimate. And what we do is we take a building and then we describe it by its individual systems. So it'll have a structure, enclosure, mechanical and electrical systems, and so on and so forth. Each one of those systems is then divided into components such as foundations, columns, and beams are part of the structure of the building. Each one of those components has a specific type and a quantity, and we can then associate those to a unit cost, so that allows us to cost out each component for each system. Once we know all of the system costs for all the systems in an asset, we add those up, and that'll give us the real property replacement cost for that asset. Once we add all of the individual replacement costs, we can have a portfolio RPRC. Another method of computing the RPRC is a cost factor analysis. The cost factor analysis is a desktop exercise where a building is matched to a similar asset in some type of costing database, and then we use a formula to create an RPRC value. So we would look for a building type that we currently have and compare it to a database. We would look at the building size. The database would give us a cost per size value. We then modify that by a location modifier, and that would give us a replacement cost. An example of that would be having a single-family dwelling or home. The building size can be calculated by the square footage. The specific type of home would be available for lookup in the costing database. We would then add any modifiers, such as a location. Once we multiply everything up, we get our replacement cost. The last method we'll be discussing in terms of creating an RPRC is a construction project cost. This is simply taking all of the actual project costs that are associated to construct an asset and using that as its estimated replacement value. The advantage of doing this is you can have a very accurate and realistic replacement cost for that asset. The problem is if there were some project cost overruns, the RPRC might be skewed, such that it would be too much, and that would impact your ability to use it to actually plan out M&R allocations, as these cost overruns may not be relevant factors in assigning maintenance strategies. So now that we've gone over some of the different methods of calculating replacement costs, we're now going to look at how D&D actually costs out its own RPRC. What we need to bear in mind is that D&D has a very large and complex portfolio. So we can't use a one-size-fits-all approach, because some of the costing methods might be too expensive while the others might be too inaccurate. That's why D&D uses a hybrid method that combines building component analysis for our major assets and cost factors analysis for many of our other assets. And please bear in mind that in this video, we're mostly referring to how we create RPRC values for our building assets. We generally have 3 different types of buildings and works. These include major buildings, which are buildings with a value of over $1 million, minor buildings, all buildings that have a value of less than $1 million, Canadian Forces Housing Agency managed buildings, and we also have several $billion worth of works. The rest of this presentation is going to focus mostly on how we provide RPRCs for our buildings, and we will not be discussing works. For our major buildings, we use building condition assessment data to calculate RPRC scores. That data is stored in VFA and is then ported over to DRIMAS. For our minor buildings, we use a cost factor analysis based on the United States Department of Defense facility cost codes. We find that this is a very useful method as their building assets are similar to our own. Lastly, for CFHA, we use the RS-Means construction cost engineering database to evaluate the cost for homes, as the homes managed by CFHA are quite common throughout Northern American housing markets. The advantage of the hybrid model is that it allows us to provide condition assessments for our 3,000 major buildings, and this would be cost prohibitive if we wanted to do this type of analysis for all 11,000 building assets. Our condition assessments also identify maintenance requirements for our major buildings, and this is something that should be done anyways. The desktop cost factor analysis is a cost-effective way and is generally accurate enough for our decision-making purposes. Lastly, project costs may include additional costs that are not relevant to M&R allocations and condition scoring, which we need to reiterate are the key purpose of reporting our RPRC values. Lastly, in conclusion, this presentation examined the RPRC. We looked at 3 different methods of creating RPRC estimates, including building component analysis, cost factors analysis, and construction project costs. Last thing to remember is that at National Defense, we use a hybrid model that is based on building component analysis for our major assets and cost factors analysis for other assets.